Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. We are really excited to talk with you about our exploration of generative AI and making permit appointments smarter in the city of Portland. We're taking very much a human-centered approach to AI and ensuring that we make government services simple, accurate, and accessible. Next slide, Odin. Here's our agenda for the day. We'll do some welcome and goals, tell you a little bit more about who we are. We'll talk about why this matters, the work that we're doing, how and what we did. We'll demo our pilot. We'll talk about our future plans, and then we want to close out with key takeaways and ample time for questions. So make sure you're putting your questions in the chat or ready to ask them at the end. Next slide, please. So my name is Hillary Brockmeyer. I am the Interim Business Solutions Division Manager at the City of Portland. I'm also the Digital Services Manager with the City of Portland. I've been working in various government areas for over 20 years. I started with the federal government, moved to state and local, and as of last August, was managing the digital services team for the City of Portland. And I want to turn it over to Evan to introduce himself.
Hey folks, my name's Evan Bowers. I am a designer and researcher for the Portland Digital Services team. I have been a part of the City of Portland since last year. I'll hand it over to Christopher.
Yes, thank you, Evan. My name is Christopher Fan. I'm a volunteer with the organization called the U.S. Digital Response, and our goal is to really work with state and local governments to introduce new patterns and practices. And we're really excited to really showcase how we were able to partner the 5 of us to get something done really quickly and share all the learnings with all of you. I'll throw it over to you, Christy.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So I'm a user researcher, also volunteering with Chris with USDR. And Ed, you're next.
Hi there, I'm Odin. I'm a web developer at the City of Portland, and I've been working kind of on the back end side of getting this chatbot going and more technical stuff. So that's back to Hillary for the next.
Thank you. So here are the goals that we've set out as part of this presentation. We want to share with you how Portland, Oregon applied generative AI to a permitting challenge that we have within the city. I think there are lots of people who have permitting challenges in state and local government specifically, and we chose to target appointments. Appointments for people who have questions about getting an appointment within the City of Portland or getting a permit or getting their project done. We also want to talk about how we identified human-centered design principles to use that in our AI implementation. We come from the place of human-centered in all aspects of our work, so we wanted to ensure that we led and followed with human-centered design. Hoping you can learn how prompt engineering, user research, and benchmarking improved our outcomes. We learned a lot in that area. We had some common challenges that we expected to have and some probably uncommon challenges. And we want to talk about our lessons learned in piloting AI in a public sector context. We also hope you can see how strategic pilots lead to long-term transformation. As opposed to going in on somewhat of a waterfall approach, we wanted to do something very quick so that we could learn very rapidly and iterate as a pilot to determine, are we even going in the right direction with generative AI? Lastly, we'd like to reflect on how similar approaches might be applied in your own agencies or departments. I'm going to turn it over to Christy to talk more about the human-centered approach that we had to user research.
Yeah, definitely. So we wanted to, when we first started, obviously Christopher and I did not necessarily have the context that some of the team did with what permitting looked like in Portland. So we began by conducting 45-minute user interviews with 6 different permit technicians, just asking them one-on-one, what are the major issues they saw and heard from are their appointment users. We really want to understand the overall context from their perspective because they are experts who are engaging with this system several times per week. And our findings really backed up the reasons behind the project scope, which is good because that's what we're coming on to. But it also gave us greater depth and clarity on the problems that we were facing. And like I said, as outsiders to this process, this was really helpful for our volunteer team in particular to just understand how all these different pieces fit together. So through conducting these interviews, we found the biggest problems at a really high level were as follows. So first, community members would often choose incorrect appointments. This was because they couldn't find the information because the website was really confusingly organized. There was unclear information hierarchy. The website organization made it difficult for users to find that information as well. And they really just didn't know what decisions to make because of the really overly complicated appointment descriptions. That also meant they experienced delays and frustrations. So when you schedule an appointment, oftentimes that wait time can be a few days to over a month, which means that users might make an incorrect appointment and not realize it for weeks, which would lead to this massive frustration and waste for them and us, or Portland, I guess. In addition to making incorrect appointments, users could get so confused by the website that they would actually make multiple different kinds of appointments just to cover their bases and avoid that multiple appointment wait time. And they would also reach out to technicians they've met previously through email and phone calls, which means that they're really duplicating these points of contact. And that actually wasted more time and resources in understanding which things were duplicated, which questions had already been answered. This meant that staff lost time rerouting customers, and some appointments went unused entirely. So that, again, wasted a lot of time there. So the solution to this was to have a working appointment bot that could address many of these problems. It could help users make the correct appointment and reduce errors and wasted time. The chatbot could also potentially see through some of that confusing layout and deliver clients with a really simple and straightforward appointment recommendation. Awesome. And I think Evan's going to also add some more context to this.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. I just kind of wanted to follow up on what Christy was speaking to with almost like a high-level takeaway that I got from this work and witnessing it. And that is, even though this project was focused on building and offering an AI chatbot, we saw that human-centered design is still key to making AI useful. So after Christy and I kind of talked to these folks about their needs and pain points, we had insights to go on and make our content more clear and organized and understandable, all of which helps AI respond in a more accurate and helpful way. So in other words, if your content is confusing or conflicting or poorly structured, AI doesn't have a solid foundation to work from. And based on a couple instances that we saw, it seems to make its best guess, which can sometimes be wrong, but also at the same time still be confident in its answer, which could be a huge problem if you're someone who's new to a service and you don't know what you don't know. So I just wanted to call out that working with USDR volunteers helped us grow our team's AI skills, but from a design and research perspective, it further confirmed to me that starting with a strong human-centered approach is essential.
Yeah.
So
100%.
I'll just,
Yeah, sorry, to add on. Our original scope was to build this chatbot. Evan and I worked together and we basically put together a report that had other different fixes that Portland could make too. So it was a nice kind of bonus for the team, hopefully, as well. Sorry.
yeah, perfect.
Well, thank you for that, Evan. So let's get to the story. What we actually set out, and really kudos to the Portland team, is do something quick. So actually, throughout everything we're talking about, we basically did this in less than 7 weeks with a combination of volunteers and kind of staff. This little innovation cycle, hopefully you can all use to really pick a right project, scope it down for learning. So I think that's the key thing that made this successful. It wasn't necessarily to have the production ready, but to experiment. And then number 2, create quality benchmarks that give the confidence we can actually do more. We will talk about how we iterated quickly through prompts, run evaluations to see how each of those changes in prompts incrementally got better, but ultimately get something quick in the hands of the stakeholders. Next slide, Oden. One of the things that actually we were able to do is take a generic concept like a chatbot, and through the user research Christy and Evan did, really boiled it down to actually a more structured conversation. Usually when you think about chatbot, it's like anything and everything under the sun. We actually did not go through that approach because we wanted to make sure there's a degree of controllability and measurement. So in this case, we decided to do a 3-part process. And you can see the word agent there. Agents is kind of the nomenclature you might hear in kind of generative AI, but you can think of it as different steps. Step one, work with the users to gather some information, minimum information, versus, if somebody just says, help me. That's probably not enough for the chatbot to have the answer. Step two, recommend a permanent appointment. And that's really where, through the user research from Evan and Christy, they found a lot of the challenges. When you're reading through multiple scrolling of pages, a lot of terminology, this is really the center point where we can actually quality benchmark. But ultimately, when the chatbot recommends something, can we quickly connect it to the existing workflows that Portland had, which was actually make a connection with the live permit technician. So really scope narrow, have some control so we can do things fast. Next slide, Odin. But before you go fast, before you start building, one of the things we had a discussion is really, how do you define quality? And this is where I think one of the biggest challenges you all might see starting from scratch is like, how do we actually define that? Well, luckily with Portland, they have a help desk team. So actually throughout the many years, through exactly what Christy and Evan were describing, the citizens were going through, there was a hotline team, an email team that actually fielded a lot of these questions about getting help. So we actually had a raw set of over 2,482 emails. So we actually use that as a starting point to create what we call synthetic examples. And that's really important because if you ask your stakeholder teams, hey, can you help me create 200 examples? That's an ask. That seems very heavy. So why not, through the powers of generative AI, in this case, we actually have examples, use what they can, which is summarize, and then generate some examples. And this is where it makes it easier for your stakeholders to pick and choose which ones are applicable, but ultimately go back and say, okay, this is an example that we can then provide ultimately the most important thing, which is the ground truth. In a perfect case with the experts, the chatbot should be as good as the experts. So it's quality benchmarking. Next slide, Odin. But with that said, benchmarks are starting point. The other thing we did was really the core of the project here is really to show how iteration on prompts can actually make a difference. Actually, if you can go the previous slide, there was a, okay, there we go. So in this case, one of the scoping of the ability to move quickly for the project, we actually did our best to use the tools we had. So Portland chose the Google ecosystem. But again, this wasn't necessarily saying that's the only infrastructure. It was a thought experiment to say, can we just use something quickly that they had access to innovate very fast? And one of the things you might see in a lot of the platforms, they have these prompt exploration playgrounds. So one of the first things is really just play around with prompts. You've all heard of that. But the key thing here is to have some place where anybody within the team could suggest edits and see what happens. And luckily, because we had examples and we can talk to our stakeholders, we can make edits. In this case, it's a prompt example. Now, what Evan mentioned is that prompts are only as good as the inputs you put into it. So if you can see here, we actually started with the most basic prompt, which is not even giving the large language model information about what's the appointment description, just the title of like a tree permit. But as you can see here, and it might be a little bit hard to see, by working with the permit technicians, we were able to structure more information to actually put within the prompt themselves. So you can see we're creating levels of improvement and seeing that over time. And one of the things USDR approached and wanted to encourage is to think about how you can build reusable practices. So we use, if you just click Odin, a LangChain, which is a framework to be able to use things like prompt templates. So this allows the team to assemble the prompt in bits and pieces. As we saw, a prompt can have a general instruction. In this case, you're a permit bot having a high-level goal. But in the middle right there, might be hard to see. You might inject the details, which is the description of one of the, I think there were 18 different appointment types. So that's one way in which any of you can manipulate prompts beyond copying and pasting. And in this case, it provides a very powerful method to really assemble these on the fly. ultimately, this point here, and the key point is iteration, because most likely, and you will do this quite a few times. And at first, you might think it's just text. How fancy can it be? But if you actually read through a lot of the literature right now, even the people who are building the most fancy chatbots, well, the core work really here is making the changes. And number two, if you go back next, Odin, running what we call an evaluation, which is really seeing how well it does. Now, luckily, remember, we decided not to have a generic chatbot that answers everything under the sun. That was not within the scope. So this actually really helped us actually create really a very simple but very powerful evaluation of how well it does. In this case, the ultimate problem to solve was to recommend an appointment. So just using users' descriptions, say we can actually connect you with an expert, and that really is an appointment type. That's a very simple classification problem. And therefore, out of the 177 examples you see here, we have a context. So that's kind of the synthetic example of what you might see a user ask. The reference is what we got from the permit technicians. The experts say this is where it should go. And the response you see is where in each of the successive iterations of the prompt, it provided. So in this case, you can see the red and the not red, we had a simplistic number of accuracy. Now, we did this so that we actually had something we can get better over time. You might have more stronger practices, but we encourage everybody to really think about what is your quality benchmark? Because in the world of generative AI, lots of things can happen. So in that case, are you comfortable letting the chatbot do anything, or perhaps scope it down, have some control, but ultimately each of those sections measure along the way? And that's really, I think, the key insights that we hope to share, that it might sound hard to do at first, but through these practices of scoping down, getting some problem examples, and just iterating, you could actually see improvement. And with that, I'll turn it over to Odin.
Thank you for Christopher. Yeah, so we'll do a little demo of our pilot proof of concept here. So the goal was to be able to pilot the chatbot with a usable interface as quickly as possible without having to do any custom front-end development. So basically just trying to get something in the hand of the stakeholders as soon as possible. To accomplish this, we decided to stay within the Google ecosystem and use their front end called Dialogflow, which is part of the larger Vertex AI suite that we used for this pilot. It allows you to create what they call a conversational agent using playbooks, which are basically what Christopher showed earlier. They're agents, basically standalone prompts that you can kind of connect to each other and pass back and forth between them. We embedded this chatbot UI on an intranet page to facilitate internal user testing. So it was kind of restricted behind our login. It has a pretty nice UI and it's a pretty plug and play experience as far as embedding it on a website goes. It also has a basic built-in feedback mechanism, as you can see there, with the thumbs up and thumbs down, which is nice. So go ahead and run this video here. So here we're just asking it a pretty straightforward question, which is the user just wants to build a retaining wall, and they're wondering if they need a permit. So it's going to follow up and just try to get as much information as possible out of them before recommending an appointment. So you can see it asks if their project was urgent and they didn't answer that. So it's going to re-prompt, ask them again. Once it's been satisfied, it's going to make a recommendation here as to the appointment type. And if the user would like to, it'll give them that link to schedule an appointment. A future improvement might be to actually go through the booking process with them. Here you can see how the feedback works. So here we gave it a thumbs down. We said it's incorrect, perhaps, and then the subject matter expert could put some additional details in there as to what it should have been. So here we're going to ask a little more obscure of a question, but it's still relatively straightforward. Again, it's going to reprompt to get some more information out of the user. Say we're just kind of wondering about it. So here again, it recommended a different appointment type. We're going to actually ask it why it suggested that one, and that can kind of help you figure out what information it was leaning on within the prompt or within the training data in order to make that recommendation. So it asks if that sounds correct. We'll say, yeah, can you book me an appointment? And then again, we'll give that link to the user. So here's an example of basically asking it something that's out of scope, but it's still kind of something that someone might ask to a city chatbot. So ask to book a table in a park, it'll redirect them to our kind of customer service line. Here's something we coded in when a user asks for help with an existing permit. We redirect them to our Dev Hub website where they can check their permit status. And then again, just kind of showing if we ask a completely unrelated question that's not at all related to the city, we'll kind of just say we can't help them and just leave them at that end. Again, it's kind of, if you keep following up, it really doesn't want to help you. So then again, you can give it feedback, and that will go into the conversation database. All right. So on the topic of user feedback and learning from results, as Christy and Evan talked about earlier, we did some internal tests with subject matter experts or SMEs. Ask them to test some easy queries, maybe, just kind of a one-to-one appointment mapping, some medium queries that might require some follow-ups or additional details, and then some hard queries that are pretty obscure, maybe like even a human might have trouble with. And that kind of helps us load up this semi-real world data into the system. Definitely, we recommend a best practice is going to be to go and review your conversation history after testing, after deploying to production, review the user interactions, and pay attention to how and what kind of information is being passed between those agents on the back end. We ran into some issues with Dialogflow where context or information from the previous messages was being lost between agents because it was either being summarized and passed around or it just wasn't being passed at all. So it's good to kind of know how your agents are working on the back end, especially if you're using a tool where it's not super customizable. The SMEs use those feedback buttons you saw in the chatbot UI to provide examples when responses were incorrect or maybe information was missing, or as well when it's a good response, we want to know that with a thumbs up. So one of the insights we learned is that it's good to understand the limitations of your tools, especially when it comes to observability and troubleshooting and tracing capabilities. We had some difficulties with Dialogflow, specifically evaluating user feedback. They have some filters where you can look for conversations that have good feedback or bad feedback. But anything beyond that requires kind of scrolling through individual conversations and looking for those instances of feedback. You can export everything to like their BigQuery tool and build your own reports, but it's just good to know what kind of built-in capabilities whatever platform you're using has for observability. So how are we going to expand beyond a proof of concept with this project? So one of our insights is that no code or kind of low code drag and drop tools are great for rapid prototyping. It really helped us get this set up in a short amount of time, but you definitely have some limitations on customization and kind of control of how your agents are interacting with each other. So our next plan is going to be to re-implement this proof of concept using the open source LangGraph framework, which is built on LangChain that Christopher mentioned earlier. That way, kind of the whole agent flow, all the prompts, etc., can be managed in a GitHub repository with version control. This will allow our team to gain some experience with kind of the more popular frameworks in the GenAI space, as well as just AI development as a whole. Hopefully, this will also allow us to extend the bot in the future with more capabilities, kind of creating a whole graph by adding additional agents that can help with other aspects of the permitting process. Another thing we might want to try is different AI models or deploying to different cloud platforms. So by using a platform agnostic framework like LangGraph, we can easily just swap to a different model or deploy it to a different platform and test out those different capabilities. Another thing we learned was that manually parsing through feedback, as I discussed earlier, and manually storing and running, generating your evaluations can be pretty cumbersome. So something we're going to explore is the different GenAI observability platforms that are out there to help with kind of continuous improvement of our chatbot quality. They have some kind of more powerful and expressive tools that help you dig down into conversations, see why it got the response it did, and kind of continuously evaluate the quality of your chatbot. So some of the options there are Langsmith, Logfire, etc. Oh, sorry, I didn't swap the slide for that one. I'll leave this up for a few seconds so it's in the recording. All right. So outcomes so far, and I'll kind of start us off, Christopher, but you can jump in if you'd like. So we're seeing higher appointment accuracy. So as Christopher showed with our evaluations, as we improve the prompt, we're seeing better accuracy in those test cases, as well as obviously that leads to better appointment recommendations to the user. We're seeing increased staff confidence due to our collaboration with the subject matter experts and kind of our internal first testing approach. As well as thanks to USDR, we're kind of gaining a reusable playbook for any future AI projects within the city and really building our team's shared knowledge of AI. You have anything to add to that, Christopher?
No, I think you're right, Odin. I think again, credit to the team here on focusing on learning, because patterns and practices can be reused all the time versus, tools change all the time. Infrastructure stack, I know there are a lot of questions here, but the ways of thinking help everybody kind of tackle the next problem beyond the permit team.
Absolutely. So some lessons for the field that we've kind of learned throughout this pilot. So AI definitely needs human framing. So you can't just kind of throw the technology at your problems. You need to first understand who your audience is, what their problems are, and what they expect out of your AI, what problems it's going to solve for the humans. Another thing is that small pilots are great. So by taking a careful and narrowly scoped approach, something really simple, especially for your first AI project, you can pilot fast and safely, even with emerging tech like generative AI. Of course, as Evan and Christy mentioned, a good chatbot still depends on good content and good test cases for evaluation. LLMs, as we know, are great at filling in the gaps, but you definitely need a good foundation with your content, and you also need a way to measure what is good. Collaboration is key. So by building a cross-functional team here with our UX researchers, kind of AI experts, our developers, as well as including your internal IT folks can be great to help kind of break down that internal red tape when it comes to setting up new tech and new platforms. Also involving frontline staff early can really help, kind of the people who are going to be on the receiving end of whatever your AI tool is suggesting. That can really help build trust and accelerate progress. Anything to add to that, Christopher?
No, I think you're spot on, Odin. It's the collaboration, because no single person from this team, even from the staff, could do it alone. It's the combination, everybody working together, sharing, and I think creating the safe space that we all learn.
Absolutely. All right, Hillary, I'll pass it back to you here.
Thank you. That's what we learned, and what we are taking away, and we suggest you take away is pilot this stuff. Before you choose on a particular product or a particular approach, try things out. We did a lot of trying, and we did a lot of adjusting early on, and I think we're going to continue to adjust over time. And those pilots do reveal additional opportunities to be able to either use generative AI or other tools and techniques to be able to provide better services to the community members and even staff. We do think that generative AI can and will reduce friction in civic services. So we might proceed down the path of continuing with our appointment chatbot. We might also use this as learning opportunity to see how we can use generative AI in other ways with permitting and development, as well as throughout the city. But we wanted to start very small to learn and to become better at the work before we moved on and try to do something large. One thing to also take away from what we think is let's all work together to make public services easier, one conversation at a time. So in this case, that conversation might be with a chatbot. It might be conversations you're having with your subject matter experts, or involving community members as you're thinking through how to use something like generative AI to solve problems for people who are seeking services from the government. Okay, I think we have one last slide, and it is, what are your questions?
Yeah, we have a lot of time for questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will stop now the recording.